$650 billion. Sorry, I don't know why that zero got stuck at the bottom. That's not a special zero. It's supposed to be the last one. $650 billion. That's how much money every year U.S. businesses lose due to distracted workers. Did you know that? On average, every person gives up about an hour and 18 minutes of your day due to distraction. So if you own a business, I'm really sorry, but you're losing money, probably because you're getting distracted too. I don't know how much you notice the distractions around you. You ever seen somebody driving on the road and they're more interested in what's on their phone than what's actually happening in front of them as they're traveling, 50 to 80 miles an hour down the road, responding to a text, scrolling on social media, or you're sitting there at the red light and the light turns green and you expect people to remember the gas is on the right and they don't because they're still scrolling, and so you give them a little love reminder or lay on the horn to let them know, let's move. Or maybe you've had the situation where you had a really important phone call to make, and so you unlocked your phone and you noticed you had a notification, and so you checked the notification, and that led to about 15 minutes of checking the rest of social media to where it got to the point you forgot why you even unlocked your phone in the first place, and you never actually made that really important phone call. Or maybe it's happened, you've gotten to work and you're like, I gotta get this report done. I gotta do this first thing in the morning. And so you open your computer and you notice you have an email, so you check your email. And then you realize you have another email, and in one of those emails was this really interesting link, and so you clicked on the link and you read this article that redirected you to a YouTube video, which led to another YouTube video, and before you knew it, an entire hour of your day had passed and you had not even gotten started on the report. I'm going to assume that you're like me and you have found yourself being diverted from what your original purpose was. That's what I want us to think about this morning as we're talking about this series, The Road to Better. I want us to think today about diversions. It's just simply something that turns our attention or our focus away from what we originally set out to do. But the big thing that I want us to think about this morning, and here's why diversions are so critical, why we must become aware of what they actually are, is because whether we intend to or not, our diversions begin with a decision. Yeah, we can say, I just got distracted. But when you really boil it down, you made a decision to allow the distraction to turn your attention away. And yeah, that can lead you to becoming unproductive in your job or forgetting to make an important phone call. But even more than that, in our spiritual life, what we can find is that our diversions turn the direction of our lives. And we thought we were headed in a direction toward growing closer to God, but then something came up, something grabbed our focus, and it really just pulled us away just a little bit and got our focus off of serving God. This morning I want to look at a text of Scripture from Proverbs chapter 7. Now let me just say at the outset, Proverbs 7 contains what I'm going to call an adult situation. I know that I'm in a room filled with a lot of children, so we're going to make sure that Proverbs 7 stays family appropriate, okay? So there's going to be certain verses. We're not going to read all of Proverbs chapter 7. But in Proverbs 7, there's going to be this story that King Solomon's going to tell. You could call it a parable. A parable is just simply a story that's easy to connect with, that applies in a number of different ways. And it's going to be told by this guy named King Solomon. He's a guy that he's king over Israel, and it's right before Israel's going to go through this period of a civil war. King Solomon was the son of King David. King David was the one that defeated Goliath the giant, if you've heard that story or read that story. King Solomon, at one point, God came to him and said, "What do you want? I'll give you whatever you ask of me." And King Solomon says, "Well, I'd really like wisdom so that I can better know how to rule your people." And God was like, "Really good choice. You could have asked for all kinds of things, but because you asked for wisdom, I'll still give you all those other things too." King Solomon's going to be the guy that builds the first temple to God, and everything's coated in gold. It was magnificent and massive. And never again would it ever have the same glory and appeal that Solomon's temple ever did. Well, Solomon, in all of his wisdom, is going to tell this parable, this story in Proverbs chapter 7. And he starts out in verse 6. He says, I'm looking out the window through the lattice, and I see among the simple. Now that phrase, the simple, that just simply means those that are living on the earth that are not really living with any kind of wisdom. They're just sort of doing whatever they want to do. It's a very simple mindset. They're not really giving any forethought to the future. But among all the simple, you just watch the people that are just going through life with no real direction. But there was this one guy, there was this young man, and Solomon said, now he had no sense about him. Now, I'm not going to ask how many of you men were young men that had no sense, probably the vast majority of us, because we've all lived, especially as young men, a chunk of our life where we didn't have any kind, we thought we had sense, but then we got to where we had sense and we realized we had no sense at all. Well, this guy not only has no direction, but he's not really paying attention to what his choices are doing for him. And so he's going down the street. He's headed. Now, again, this is a parable. He's headed in a certain direction. And he's near her corner. We're going to talk about her in just a minute. And he's walking in the direction of her house. So don't miss what Solomon's saying. He's going down a path. And it's not a great path to begin with. And look at the time of the day. It's twilight. The sun is setting. The dark of night is setting in. And if you're like me, when I was growing up, my parents would always tell me, what happens after the sun goes down is rarely good. Right? Why do you need to stay out that late? It's probably not going to result in any kind of good. Well, for this young man, it definitely was not going to result in good. And so I'm going to look at the New Living Translation just for verse 10. It says, this woman approached him. She's seductively dressed and she's sly of heart. Now, this is a parable because this woman is going to represent more than just what she represents in this story. But then it describes her. She's unruly. She's defiant. Her feet never stay at home. She's lurking at every corner. So this is someone who's out looking for trouble. And then she grabbed hold to him. And with a brazen face, she kissed him and said, now let me just pause. I need to brace you for what you're going to read next. It's going to be really strong, okay? Here's what she said. Today I have fulfilled my vows and I have food from my fellowship offering at home. Woo, man, folks, that's strong. Do you get that? That's how she got this young man's attention. Now, I don't know what kind of pickup lines you've heard before, but if you have struck out with pickup lines, try that one. She said, I got fried chicken from the church fellowship at my house. That's basically what she said. What in the world is she saying? Here's in short what she said. She said, I've gone and I've asked for forgiveness for what I'm already about to do. I emptied my sin bucket and now I'm ready to fill it again. Which we look at that and we say, that's terrible. Why would you ever do that? Yet, there's a lot of folks that live that way. She's going to go on to describe the husband that she has who's not at home and is not going to be home for a while. And she's going to invite this young man into her home and basically tell him, hey, as long as nobody gets caught, there's no consequences, right? Because he's simple. He's just following his desires. And so with persuasive words, pay attention. She led him astray. Remember, he's headed in a direction that was not a great direction, but all of a sudden he diverts. He takes a turn. And now he's following her. Where he wasn't necessarily headed in a great direction, now he's headed in a really terrible direction. And she's seducing him with her smooth talk. And then it says, at once he followed her. And you just got to picture this in your mind. Like this young man is probably feeling really confident. And he has no idea what he's about to walk into. Solomon says he followed her like an ox headed to the slaughter. Like a deer stepping into a noose till an arrow pierces his liver, or maybe not a deer stepping into a noose, maybe the deer walking out onto the cornfield ready for a bullet to pierce its liver. Like a bird darting into a snare, not even knowing it's about to cost him his life. That's what Solomon describes in this story. And then he's going to give the conclusion. So he said, now then, my sons, not just sons, this is an analogy for anybody who would read it. My children, listen to this. Pay attention to what I'm telling you. This is critically important. Do not let your heart turn. Do not let your heart turn to her ways. We're going to talk about her in just a second, or stray into her paths. Many are the victims she has brought down. Her slain are among this mighty throng of people. Her house is this highway to the grave. It's headed in a direction, but what you don't realize is that it's headed to your own death and destruction, leading down to the chambers of death. This is just a story. This is a parable that he's telling. Now, in this story, this woman becomes symbolic of temptation, of this just diversion. But for you and I, that temptation becomes something different. It's just something that can divert our attention. We're all trying to follow Jesus, and we're trying to walk the path, what Jesus called the straight and narrow. But there's so many things in our life that are trying to get our attention, right? It's like all these things that are flashing at us saying, hey, look over here. Hey, pay attention to this. Hey, enjoy this. And what we don't realize is that as we shift our eyes, it sort of turns our life a little bit. It's kind of like if you've ever been driving and you look at something on the right, and before you realize it, you've kind of run off the road a little bit to the right because you didn't mean to. It's just as you turn your eyes, your hands turned a little bit too. And maybe the person beside you that's in the passenger seat starts losing their mind, like, hey, you're running off the road. And you're like, oh, sorry. I was just looking at something on the right, not realizing that my eyes turned everything. And that's the challenge for us as believers as we're trying to follow Jesus, and there's all these things that are trying to grab our focus, trying to grab our focus, like, hey, look at this. Here's something you really need to buy. Just think all the ads that you see every day. Buy this. This will make your life better. Try this fixture. Try this medicine. Just give yourself to purchase after purchase after purchase, chasing it, not realizing turning your heart. Or think about all the things we can find ourselves overcommitted to in our schedule of all these good activities, and we're running from one thing to the next, not realizing the toll it's taking on us physically and on us spiritually when we find ourselves overcommitted. Or think about how relationships can just very quickly and simply just turn our eyes off of Jesus a little bit as we focus on this individual thinking, that's the one that's going to make my life perfect. Or, I'm just really focused on my career right now. I've got to give extra time because I'm trying to become successful in this. I'm trying to get this promotion, get this raise, have this opportunity. And what I don't realize is that I've focused so much time, attention, and as Solomon said, I allowed my heart, I didn't realize it, just to turn just a little bit. Because when we divert, it changes our direction. And if we're not careful, if we don't really pay attention, then what will happen is what Jesus said would happen in Matthew chapter 13. He has this parable called the parable of the sower, where he talks about this farmer is going out scattering seed, and this seed is following all different kinds of paths, and one of the paths is called the thorny path. It just finds itself surrounded by things that are keeping it from growing. And then when he interprets the parable, he says, the seed, which is the word of God, it falls among the thorns. And it refers to somebody who hears the word. It's describing somebody who goes to church. It's talking about somebody who listens to lesson after lesson, who sings song after song. But what they don't realize is that the worries of this life, the deceitfulness of wealth, and I think you could continue to place in many more things. I don't think Jesus gave an all-encompassing, exhaustive list in just those two things. He's talking about things that are diverting our attention, and when it diverts our attention, it begins to choke out the word. What does that mean? It chokes out God's ability to work powerfully in our life. And it makes his word unfruitful because our diversions are decisions that change the direction of our lives. Because when you change direction, things change. And as we've been talking about last week and this week and for the next couple of weeks, our decisions are pathways. They are taking us somewhere. Every decision is having an impact on our life. It's altering our course, or it's keeping us on the right path. And if we truly want to be on the road to better, we've got to pay attention to these little diversions. and distractions, not detours. We're not talking about detours. A detour is something that gets you off but brings you back to the right path. God oftentimes uses detours to teach us lessons or to keep us from something. We're talking about a diversion, something that completely alters our direction, and it's not intending to bring us back to the same place. And it's a challenge for us because diversions do a couple things to us. First off, they make us distant from God. It just slightly diverts our focus away from Him, gets it onto something else, and then we begin to drift. It's kind of like if you find yourself spending more time scrolling social media or watching some kind of series on Netflix than you spend time with the Lord. Don't be shocked that you've drifted in your relationship from God. If you spend more time playing a video game than you spend time with God and His Word and in prayer and with other believers, you're going to see this drift happen in your spiritual life. And it's not that God moved away. It's that we turned and moved away from Him. And after a period of time, you'll look back and you'll go, I am so far from God. What happened? I can tell you exactly what happened. Your eyes turned. And as your eyes turned, so did your heart, which turned your feet and took you a different direction. Intentionally or not, it altered your direction. It also can cause us to lose our purpose. We all have this God-given purpose. We all have God-given talents and abilities. We've all been placed on this earth for a specific reason. But one of the things that can happen in life is that our attention gets diverted off of God and we start to use those talents and gifts for personal gain. Or we just think that I've got to do this because this is what one of my parents did, even though it's not necessarily my calling and my purpose in life. Or I've got to pursue this career because I need to make X amount of money so that I can have X amount of happiness. And I'm not really living out my purpose that God has given to me. That diversion can cost us more than we will ever realize. Thirdly, it can make us spiritually weak. Because the way to be spiritually strong is to regularly engage in spiritual practices and disciplines. Regularly spending time with God and His Word, in time in prayer, in time with other believers. And if our attention is diverted in the sacrifices in the time we're spending with God and with His people, then we'll find ourselves spiritually weak. And when we are spiritually weak, we are prone, even more prone to an attack from the enemy. But wait a minute, this morning in our adult Bible class in the auditorium, Ben talked about the shield of faith, right, Ben? There's the shield of faith, and I can just hold it up, and I can defend the fiery darts of the evil one. And sometimes when we think of the shield of faith, we're like, I can just hold this shield, and I can protect myself. Except they're fiery darts. And not every dart was intended to land on the shield, because as it lands around you, especially in the month of August where it's so dry, I even washed cars the other day to try to get it to rain unsuccessfully. And it lands in this dry ground. All of a sudden, everything around you is on fire. And now you can't defend yourself against the enemy because you're too busy putting out fires around you. And next thing you know, he does land one of those fiery darts, and it takes you out spiritually. It burns your life, pulls you away from God. That's not what Paul was describing in Ephesians chapter 6. Ben mentioned it this morning, and I'd forgotten he was teaching on Ephesians 6 when I added this to my notes, but it worked out perfectly. This is what Paul was talking about in Ephesians 6. He's describing this Roman formation called the tortoise shell, where every soldier who had a shield would use their shield to protect someone else. It wasn't just to protect themselves, because you can't fully protect yourself with a shield, because you don't have 360 degrees of protection. But when you get in formation with other believers, now you can defend one another. This is why diversions, Satan is so good at using diversions. Just to say, hey, look over here, pay attention to this. We turn our eyes, we turn our feet, we turn our heart, and we start pursuing. And what we don't realize is we just walked away from the formation of safety. We just went out on our own. And our shield at that point has little advantage to protecting us, because it's not what it was designed for. It was designed to be found in the community, not in isolation. But that's what diversions do. They isolate. They make us feel like I'm all alone. I'm sitting in a room full of people and I'm all alone. It might be, if you feel that way, I'm not saying this is for everyone, but it could possibly be because you diverted. You didn't realize it, but your heart and your feet took you away. Something else in life pulled your focus away, and it pulled your heart away. The beauty of the gospel, the beauty of what Jesus is offering to us, is what Mason read to us. It's this opportunity to go back, to stop right where we are, and to do what Solomon said, ponder the path of your feet. Ponder, I think the NIV says, pay attention. It just means stop what you're doing and just think about where are you currently and where are you headed. Ponder the path of your feet so that all your ways can be sure, because if you're not paying attention to where you're going, you're never going to wind up where you want to be. Stop and pause and say, am I currently living in the direction of the destination that I desire? So I'm going to say, don't swerve to the right or to the left. Don't allow these diversions to pull you away. Find the goal that you're pursuing and stay fixated on it. As it says in Hebrews, focusing our eyes on Jesus, the author and finisher of our faith, just pursuing God at all costs. I won't allow anything. We got to have that attitude. I won't allow anything to pull my heart away from God. And when it does, to allow my brothers and sisters in Christ to gently come alongside me and say, hey, I'm concerned about your direction. Now, they may not word it that way. It might be worded like, I'm concerned about your choices, or I've been missing you, or I've noticed you've been a little distant. Hear the direction in that concern. Concern you've drifted. I'm concerned you're not paying attention to where your feet are taking you, whether it be physically or metaphorically. But it's a question that we all must answer. Am I currently living in the direction of the destination that I desire? There have been many who've come up with plenty of excuses over the years. It's that when blank happens, then I'll blank, fill in the blank. You know what I'm talking about. Like, you ever heard somebody say, you know, when I get out of high school, then I'll get more serious about my faith. When I have children, then I'll get more plugged into church. When I retire, then I'll have more time to serve the Lord. And all the retired people laughed because they're like, time? What is it? You're just getting more tired, right? Because that's what retirement, I think, is supposed to be, just getting tired over and over again. We can come up with plenty of excuses, but at the end of the day, it's the same thing. It's pushing the ball down the road. It's saying, when this hypothetical situation arrives, then I'll get serious about the direction that I'm headed, not realizing that every day you are headed in a direction. Every day your decisions are leading you somewhere. And the wise thing to do, it's not the easy thing to do. The wise thing to do is to pause and to ask, am I currently living in the direction of the destination that I desire? If I continue this way, am I going to end up where I want to be? See, nobody gets lost on purpose. Nobody sets out to get lost, but plenty of people find themselves lost. Many times, unintentionally. Oftentimes, because they just diverted. Just one little decision. It seemed so subtle. It seemed innocent. It was just a one-time deal. Not realizing, as Solomon said, it would cost our life. So this morning, if you're pondering the path of your feet and you're not satisfied about the direction that they're taking you, the Bible has a word for what you need to do. Repent. In its truest form, it just simply means turn. If you don't like the direction you're headed, stop going that direction and turn. And the way to turn is to turn back to the one who said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Turn back to Jesus. and follow him. And he will take you where you ultimately need to be. Now, don't get me wrong, it's going to require you to constantly keep your eyes focused on him and to fight all kinds of temptations and diversions. And temptations from the enemy to say, look at this, pay attention to this. And that's why our community is so important. That's why our church family is so important, that we constantly encourage one another. Let's head this direction. Let's keep our eyes focused on Jesus, following him, and let him take care of everything else. If you're here this morning and you're not a follower of Jesus, you've never been baptized into Christ, I hope today you'll consider completely changing the direction of your life, surrendering your heart to him, and being baptized into Christ. If you're here and you want to repent, our shepherds are going to be up front and in the back. They'd love to pray with you and to pray over you, to encourage you. We, as a church family, want to walk together. We want to welcome you back into this body of believers and to say we all want to head in the direction that is following Jesus. If there's anything we can do to encourage you this morning, please let it be known as together we stand and sing.